I knew something was wrong when my property tax bill showed up addressed to current resident instead of my name. I'd inherited my grandfather's lakefront cabin 3 years ago, a modest but cherished piece of paradise that had been in our family for over 40 years. What I discovered next would change my life forever. The cabin sat on the northwestern shore of Lake Evergreen, part of a small community called Pinewood Shores. While technically part of an HOA, the association had been fairly hands-off during my grandfather's time. That all changed when Judith Powler took over as president 18 months ago. I'm Ethan Quinn, just an ordinary plumber who happened to inherit a slice of heaven. My grandfather had been meticulous about everything, especially his property. He'd taught me that owning land wasn't just about possession, it was about stewardship. So when I called the county clerk's office to inquire about the strangely addressed tax bill, I expected a simple clerical error. "I'm sorry, Mr. Quinn, but according to our records, you no longer own that property," the clerk informed me. "It was sold 3 months ago to Lakeview Development Corporation." My heart stopped. "That's impossible. I never sold anything." "Well, sir, I have the deed transfer right in front of me. It appears the Pinewood Shores Homeowners Association executed the sale on your behalf due to unpaid association fees." I nearly dropped the phone. "Unpaid fees? That's ridiculous. I've paid every bill they've sent." After hanging up, I immediately dug through my financial records. Every monthly HOA invoice had been paid on time, with confirmation numbers to prove it. Someone was lying, and I was determined to find out who. The next morning, I drove the 2 hours from my apartment in the city to Pinewood Shores. As I pulled into the familiar gravel driveway, a private property sign greeted me where my grandfather's hand-carved wooden welcome sign once stood. My blood boiled as I noticed construction equipment parked near the treeling. I knocked on the door of my neighbor, Frank Thompson, a retired firefighter who'd been friends with my grandfather for decades. "Ethan!" Frank's weathered face broke into a smile before quickly falling. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Do you know what's happening? I just found out yesterday that apparently I don't own my property anymore," I said. "What's going on, Frank?" Frank invited me in and poured 2 cups of coffee. "It's that Judith Powler woman. Ever since she became HOA president, she's been on a power trip. Started implementing all sorts of new rules and fees. When people complained, she'd find ways to fine them. I think she's working with some development company to convert the whole lakefront into luxury condos. But how could she sell my property? I've paid every fee." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Did you pay the special assessment for the community dock repairs?" "What special assessment? I never received anything about that." "That's what I figured." Frank nodded grimly. "Several of us never got those notices either, but Judith claims they were sent. Those who didn't pay got hit with fines, penalties, and eventually foreclosure notices. 3 properties have already been sold, including yours. I only escaped because I happened to run into the postal carrier who admitted Judith had instructed her to return certain letters to sender." My mind was racing. This couldn't be legal. I need to speak with Judith. Good luck with that. HOA office hours are supposedly Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to 11 a.m., but she's rarely there. Word is she's meeting with contractors today at the old Jasper boathouse. I thanked Frank and headed toward the boathouse, fury building with each step. As I approached, I heard Judith's distinct voice, her tone dripping with self-importance. "Phase 1 is nearly complete," she was saying. "We've secured 3 prime lakefront properties already, including the Quinn lot. Once we have the Thompson property, we'll control the entire North Shore." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "What about the owners?" a man's voice asked. Judith laughed dismissively. "Most are absentee owners who inherited these old cabins and barely visit. We just need to be creative with the notices. If they don't receive the special assessments, they can't pay them. If they don't pay, we fine them, and eventually, we can foreclose. It's all perfectly legal." "But what if they fight it?" the man pressed. "By the time they figure it out, the sale is completed. They might complain, but few have the resources to take on a legal battle. Besides, the HOA bylaws give us broad authority. I've made sure of that. I'd heard enough. Stepping into the boathouse, I confronted them directly. Actually, Judith, I think I might have both the resources and the motivation to take you on. Judith Powler whipped around, her perfectly highlighted bob swinging with emotion. She was dressed in a tailored blazer despite the casual lakeside setting, pearls gleaming at her neck. Beside her stood a man in an expensive suit who I assumed was the developer. Mr. Quinn. She recovered quickly, forcing a smile. What a surprise. We were just discussing community improvements. Really? Because it sounded like you were discussing how you fraudulently sold my property after deliberately withholding assessment notices. The developer shifted uncomfortably. I think I should go. No, please stay, I said, blocking the doorway. This concerns you too, especially if you've invested in stolen property. Judith's fake smile disappeared. Your property wasn't stolen, Mr. Quinn. The HOA followed all proper procedures for non-payment of dues. If you'd bothered to visit your cabin more often or update your contact information, perhaps you would have received the notices. I pulled out my phone. My contact information hasn't changed in 3 years, and I have records of every payment made to the HOA. What I don't have is any notice about a special assessment, which is interesting since I just recorded you admitting to deliberately withholding those notices. The color drained from Judith's face. You can't record people without their consent. That's illegal. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to a recording, and I definitely consented. Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you reverse the fraudulent sale of my property immediately. And the hard way? The developer asked quietly. The hard way involves lawyers, police, and probably the local news stations. I'm sure they'd love to hear how the president of Pinewood Shores HOA conspired to steal properties from homeowners. Judith's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. You're a plumber, for God's sake. You can't afford the kind of legal battle I can throw at you. That's when I played my trump card. Actually, while plumbing is my profession, it's also my business. Quinn's Plumbing Services operates in 3 counties and employs 17 people. And my attorney happens to be my sister, who specializes in real estate law. So, about that property deed. For a moment, Judith looked genuinely shaken. But then her composure returned, and she smiled coldly. Even if what you're suggesting were true, which it isn't, the sale has already gone through. The property belongs to Lakeview Development now. You missed your window to contest it. The developer, who had been silent, finally spoke up. Ms. Powler, if there's any irregularity in how these properties were acquired, I want no part of it. My company's reputation, there are no irregularities. Judith snapped. Mr. Quinn is simply upset that he failed to meet his obligations to the community. I smiled. Let's let a judge decide that, shall we? And while we're at it, perhaps the county prosecutor would be interested in mail fraud, since you apparently instructed the postal carrier to interfere with federal mail. The developer excused himself, practically sprinting from the boathouse, leaving Judith and me alone. Her eyes burned with hatred. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Quinn. I have connections in this county you couldn't imagine. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never inherited that rundown shack. I leaned forward. No, Judith. You have no idea who you're dealing with. My grandfather taught me that a man's word and his land are sacred. You've messed with both, and I promise you'll regret it. As I walked away, I knew this was just the beginning. What I didn't know was how deep Judith's scheme went, or how dramatically the tables were about to turn. The next day, I contacted my sister, Janet Quinn. She kept our family name after her divorce, who immediately filed an emergency injunction to halt any development on my property. She also helped me file a formal complaint with the county prosecutor's office regarding potential mail fraud and HOA misconduct. This is serious, Ethan, Janet said after reviewing the documents. Judith didn't just target you. I found records of 5 properties that the HOA has foreclosed on in the past year, all sold to the same company for well below market value. 5? Frank only mentioned 3. Janet nodded. 2 were seasonal residents who probably don't even know yet. And here's the interesting part: Lakeview Development was formed just 18 months ago, right around when Judith became HOA president. You think she's part owner? I think we need to find out. I'll submit a request for their corporate filings. While Janet worked the legal angle, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I reached out to other Pinewood Shores residents and discovered a pattern of intimidation. Many had received outrageous fines for minor infractions: grass half an inch too tall, mailboxes painted the wrong shade of brown, unauthorized bird feeders. Those who complained found themselves targeted with even more violations. One resident, Clara Jenkins, invited me into her immaculate cottage and showed me a folder bulging with violation notices. It started after I spoke against Judith at a board meeting, Clara explained, her hands trembling slightly as she sorted through the papers. First, it was my flower beds. Apparently, purple petunias are not approved flora. Then it was my wind chimes, my garden gnome, even the color of my curtains. I've paid over $3,000 in fines this year. That's outrageous, I said. Did you appeal? To whom? Judith appointed all her friends to the Architectural Review Committee. They rubber stamp whatever she wants. Clara wasn't alone. By the end of the day, I had spoken with 12 homeowners, all with similar stories. But the most valuable conversation came from an unexpected source. Melissa Turner, who worked as a part-time administrative assistant for the HOA, approached me as I was leaving Clara's house. "Mr. Quinn? Can I talk to you somewhere private?" she asked nervously, glancing around the street. We drove to a diner in the next town, and over coffee, Melissa confirmed our suspicions and revealed much more. "Judith doesn't just run the HOA, she controls it completely," Melissa explained. "Board elections haven't actually happened in over a year. She just announces the results with no one to challenge her. How is that possible? Most homeowners are seasonal or elderly. They trust the process. But that's not the worst part." Melissa lowered her voice. "I've seen documents that show Judith's husband, Richard Powler, is the primary investor in Lakeview Development. They're using the HOA to acquire prime lakefront properties at a fraction of their value. That's a massive conflict of interest," I said. "It's fraud," Melissa corrected. "And I think they're rushing because of the highway extension. The state announced plans to build a new interchange just 10 miles from here. Once that happens, property values will skyrocket." Melissa agreed to provide copies of key documents, and I left our meeting with renewed determination. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. It was about stopping a criminal enterprise that was stealing from an entire community. 2 days later, Janet called with bombshell news. "Ethan, I just received the corporate filings for Lakeview Development. Judith Powler isn't just connected to the company, she's the chief financial officer. And there's more. 3 of the properties they acquired through HOA foreclosure have already been sold to a larger development company for triple what they paid." "So they're flipping the properties?" I asked. "Exactly. And guess who approved those sales on behalf of Lakeview? Richard Powler, who conveniently failed to disclose his relationship to the HOA president in any of the filings." I whistled. "That's blatant fraud." "It gets worse," Janet continued. "I spoke with the county recorder's office. The deed transfers for these properties show dramatically different procedures than normal foreclosures. There are missing notifications, accelerated timelines, and in your case, they claimed abandonment of the property, which is laughable given your tax payments and utility usage. So what's our next move? I've already scheduled a hearing for next week on our injunction. In the meantime, keep gathering evidence. The more homeowners who come forward, the stronger our case." The next week was a flurry of activity. More residents shared their stories, and Melissa provided crucial internal documents showing how Judith had manipulated HOA records to target specific properties. We also discovered that Judith had been redirecting HOA funds for administrative expenses that couldn't be accounted for. The day before our court hearing, I received an unexpected call from the developer I'd confronted at the boathouse. "Mr. Quinn, this is Maxwell Cooper from Lakeview Development. I think we need to talk." We met at a lawyer's office in the city, with Janet present. Cooper looked nervous, fidgeting with his tie as he spoke. "After our encounter, I conducted my own investigation into how these properties were acquired. What I found concerned me. I was brought into this project as a silent investor, told these were legitimate opportunities from distressed property owners. I had no idea about the manipulated foreclosures. Yet you profited from them," Janet pointed out. Cooper nodded. "Yes, and I'm prepared to make that right. I want to cooperate fully with your case against Judith and Richard Powler. They've placed my reputation and business at risk, and I believe they've been skimming money from the investment pool as well." This was an unexpected twist, and a potential break in our case. Cooper agreed to provide testimony about Judith's methods and turned over financial records showing suspicious transfers from Lakeview Development to offshore accounts. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse was packed. Word had spread throughout Pinewood Shores, and dozens of homeowners had come to support our case. Judith arrived with her attorney, looking confident in an expensive suit, barely acknowledging the hostile stares from her neighbors. As the hearing began, our attorney presented evidence of the fraudulent property transfers, the conflicts of interest, and the mail fraud scheme. Judith's attorney tried to argue that all actions were within the HOA's legal authority, but the judge seemed skeptical. Then came the bombshell. Cooper took the stand and methodically outlined how Judith and Richard had orchestrated the entire scheme, providing dates, amounts, and copies of communications that left no doubt about their intentions. Judith's face grew increasingly pale as Cooper spoke. When he finished, her attorney requested a brief recess, during which we observed a heated argument between Judith and her lawyer. When court resumed, Judith's attorney addressed the judge. "Your Honor, in light of new evidence, my client would like to propose a settlement." The judge frowned. "This isn't just a civil matter anymore, Counselor. Based on the evidence presented, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges." Judith finally looked worried. Her perfectly maintained composure cracked as she realized the severity of her situation. The judge granted our emergency injunction, halting all development at Pinewood Shores and freezing the assets of Lakeview Development. More importantly, he ordered that all property transfers executed by the HOA under Judith's leadership be reviewed for potential reversal. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us. I kept my comments brief, focusing on the community's relief rather than gloating over Judith's downfall. But I couldn't help feeling a surge of satisfaction as I watched her slip out a side door, surrounded by grim-faced lawyers. "This isn't over," Janet warned me as we drove back to Pinewood Shores. "The criminal investigation will take time, and unwinding all these property transfers will be complicated." She was right, but I was prepared for the long haul. My grandfather had taught me that some things were worth fighting for, no matter how long it took. 3 months passed, filled with depositions, document reviews, and meetings with prosecutors. The investigation expanded beyond Pinewood Shores as authorities discovered similar schemes at 2 other communities where Judith had previously served on HOA boards. In a stroke of poetic justice, the state's attorney used civil forfeiture laws to seize Lakeview Development's assets as proceeds of criminal activity. This included all 5 properties they had fraudulently acquired, including my cabin. Then came an unexpected opportunity. The prosecutor handling the case called me one afternoon. "Mr. Quinn, we have an unusual situation. As you know, we've seized the Lakeview properties, but the state doesn't want to be in the real estate business long term. We're looking for a solution that would restore the community while ensuring these properties don't fall into similar hands." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "We'd like to offer you the opportunity to purchase all 5 properties at their assessed tax value, which is substantially below market rate. You could then offer the original owners the chance to buy back their properties at the same price." I was stunned. "Why me? You spearheaded this case when everyone else was too intimidated to act. The community trusts you. Plus, your business background indicates you have the financial capability. Consider it the state's way of making things right. I didn't need long to decide. Using my business's line of credit and some personal savings, I purchased all 5 properties, including my own cabin. Then I reached out to the other 4 homeowners with a proposition. They could buy back their properties at my cost, or if they preferred, I would rent the properties to them at a fair rate until they could afford to repurchase. 2 owners immediately bought back their cabins. One elderly couple, who had moved to Florida and couldn't afford to maintain 2 homes, gratefully accepted my rental offer. The 4th property had belonged to a man who had passed away during the ordeal, with no heirs coming forward to claim it. Just like that, I became a landlord at Pinewood Shores, owning 2 lakefront properties, including the one that had been in my family for generations. 6 months after our initial court victory, Judith and Richard Powler were indicted on multiple felony charges, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering. They accepted a plea deal to avoid trial, with Judith sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and Richard to 3. They were also ordered to pay substantial restitution to the affected homeowners. With Judith gone, Pinewood Shores needed new leadership. Despite my initial reluctance, I agreed to serve as interim HOA president until proper elections could be held. My first act was to overhaul the bylaws, implementing transparency requirements and limitations on the board's power to levy fines or foreclose on properties. The community began to heal. Weekend barbecues returned to the lakefront. Children played on the community dock without fear of arbitrary rules. Neighbors who had been intimidated into silence found their voices again. One warm evening, as I sat on my cabin's porch watching the sunset over Lake Evergreen, Frank Thompson joined me with 2 beers in hand. "You know," he said after we'd sat in comfortable silence for a while, "your grandfather would be mighty proud of what you've done here." I smiled, thinking of the man who had taught me the value of standing up for what's right. "I was just protecting what's mine." Frank chuckled. "You did a lot more than that, son. You saved this whole community." Looking out at the peaceful lake, at families enjoying their properties without fear of predatory enforcement, I realized he was right. What had begun as a fight for my inheritance had become something much larger, a restoration of community and justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Judith had secretly sold my lake property out from under me, thinking I wouldn't fight back. Now, not only had I reclaimed my family's legacy, but I'd become a landlord to properties she had tried to steal, including hers. The Powlers' lakefront home had been seized and sold at auction to cover part of their restitution payments, and I'd been the highest bidder. Sometimes justice works in mysterious ways. Judith had wanted to be the queen of Pinewood Shores, controlling everyone's property with an iron fist. Instead, she was serving time in a federal prison while I was restoring the community to what it was always meant to be, a place where families could create memories that lasted generations, just as my grandfather had intended. As for me, I still run my plumbing business during the week, but now I spend every weekend at the lake. I've started restoring my grandfather's old wooden welcome sign, the one Judith had thrown away. It will hang once again at the entrance to my property, a symbol of continuity, perseverance, and the immutable truth that some things, once in your blood, can never truly be taken away.